Before beginning, we take a moment to recognize that here in Nevada, we stand on the land of the Washishu, Washoe, Numu, Northern Paiute, Niue, Western Shoshone, Nuwu, Southern Paiute. We take a moment to recognize and honor their stewardship that continues into today. With this recognition, we state an intention to rightfully include their voice and respect them as the 27 sovereign tribal nations of Nevada. Jerry?
And so I'll unmute myself. So thank you for joining us on this Sunday afternoon. We usually start off our program first by introducing the board. So I'm Jerry Burton. We've kind of changed our officers recently. So I'm the co-executive director with Sue. I'm in charge of programs and the coalition coordinator. And Sue Birch is the other co-executive director. She's in charge of legislative PAC coordination. She's our PAC treasurer as well, as a different hat. So then you met Eva. She's our director of membership and volunteer coordinator. Madalena Robertson is our director of technology and media and midnight texting with me to do just about everything on the website and graphics. So thank you, Madalena, for putting up with me yet again this month. Sarah Evans is our director of fundraising, helping us plan our event coming up that we'll be telling you about. Michelle Maese is our director of outreach. Hi, Michelle. Laura Campbell, I don't think Laura's here today. I think she's out of town. She is our director of actions. And Samantha Glover, I saw you, Samantha. Hi. She's our new board member. She's a director of youth outreach, and we're so excited to have her join us. And Tricia Methner is our secretary, and Lenore Briley is our treasurer. So I think everyone but Laura is here today. And we were going to let you know about some events coming up in March and April. I added one at the end. Madalena, she usually drops it in the chat for us. There's on Tuesday, there's a Nevada Coalition to Eliminate the Death Penalty is having a rally March 22nd. It's at 8 a.m. early. And so we'll put some information about the location for that. That's a kind of a coalition partner of ours. GenderFest 2022, another partner of ours, Gender Justice Nevada is putting that on with the center. That one's on March 26th, 10 to 4. And that will have some information on how to get more information on that. We are a sponsor of the Youth Powwow for the Planet. It is April 23rd at UNLV, and we'll have some information how you can contact and get more information on that. We are donating because we're helping with some of the awards that the students are getting, and Mercedes Krause has let us know about it. So we hope to be there and help out with that. So, and then our next Nevada Now program is April 24th at 4. So hold the date for that. And I'm going to turn it over to Sue to give a quick update on, I don't know how quick it can be because we're doing a lot, but Sue gets to do the PAC events and PAC update.
Yay.
Yay.
Thanks, Jerry. Next Sunday, it's a week from today, we'll have our Meet the Candidates event. It is our PAC fundraiser. We have over 30 candidates attending. A couple of the assembly women that are on here today are attending, and I'm absolutely thrilled. But we'll also have, I think it's somewhere around a dozen judicial candidates, as well as 5 of our 7 early endorsed candidates. So, I mean, every day I get somebody else that's coming. This event is for all of you. This is an absolute opportunity for you to be one-on-one with some of these candidates. So I hope if you haven't RSVP'd yet, please do so. We tried to keep the cost of it down because, yes, we want to raise money for our PAC, but we do have some sponsorships available. don't let the cost of the event keep you from attending. I think it's going to be really, really special, and just let us know you're coming, because you can make a donation at the door. I just, with the candidates I see coming, I think it's going to be really, really interesting, and a heck of a lot of fun too. Connie's got some great wines planned. We've got a selfie station planned. There's going to be all kinds of information. I don't know how many of you have followed the filings, because the filings are all done. It's going to be a crazy election season. And so it's going to take everybody to, all hands on deck for phone banking, texting, canvassing, writing postcards, you name it. So in the immortal words of Kate Marshall from was that a couple of months ago? I can't even remember. Step out of your comfort zone, put on that super suit, and help us out. And I know Madalena will put something in the chat. We've already got phone banks and stuff happening. We have a phone bank for Ozzy Fumo planned on March 29th at 6:30. April 2nd, there's a town hall for Ozzy at 10 a.m. Tomorrow night, there's a phone bank for Congressman Horsford. I don't remember what time that was. Was that like 5-ish or something? Oh, I forgot to write that down.
Yeah, I think you got it in the chat.
If you know me, just sitting here and talking right now is not in my comfort zone. I'm real good one-on-one, but this stuff is not necessarily in my wheelhouse. So every time we have a meeting, I've got on my super suit, and Jerry and I have been out and around. So you got to take it a little step, just one little step out of your comfort zone, and let us know what you're able to do. Phone bank, text bank, canvas, write postcards, whatever. It's just going to absolutely be necessary this season. There you go. So, but please come next Sunday. We'd love to see you in person.
Yes, we could be in person, and it's outdoors. The weather's supposed to be in the mid 80s. So somebody's looking down on us, blessing us with good weather, said the atheist. But anyway, so we'll start our program. Is there anything else we need to cover, Madalena? Did I get everything, or Sue, before we get going? Good deal. If you have any events that you know of or your organization is doing, feel free to put it in the chat. If you're running for office and you want to put your contact information, this is a good place to put it, and share information. And then we save the chat and put notes for, when we have links to your organizations for the people who are speaking today. So thank you, everybody, for being here. What, Sue?
I forgot a couple of things.
Okay. Before I get into my spiel about
before you get in your spiel, I didn't want to mess up your rhythm. We as Nevada Now are going to have a whole bunch of candidate events. Also, we're planning on with National. We're helping them coordinate one with our congressional leaders. Horsford, Titus, and Lee. We're working on a town hall forum kind of thing for the 3 women candidates for lieutenant governor. I can't remember now what else we were working on.
And Catherine Cortez Masto, we're trying to put
and we're working on a town hall for Catherine Cortez Masto. So we're gonna try to put it all out there for all of you. So just wanted to let you know to keep an eye on it, that we're going to be very active in this. So Thanks.
So National Now PAC is already endorsed on the federal level for those candidates, and then we can have events to bring attention and have our members be able to ask questions. And so anyway, we'll be letting you know about all of that. So got all that done. So today we're celebrating Women's History Month. We're also celebrating the 5th anniversary. It's been 5 years since Nevada legislature voted to ratify the ERA, and we were the 36th state. And Kate Kelly this morning tweeted about it, showing a Nevada Now post, and I was just so excited, and I've been sharing that. So it's a big day in Nevada. And so I just wanted to start with the thought that for just a moment, imagine a world where all people have equal rights and opportunities, and gender equality is the norm. And our Nevada State ERA is on the ballot this year, and it will help us get closer to equality for all. It's one of the first in the United States to be this inclusive, and we need everyone to help us to educate voters and include your organizations this on their slate for ballot questions when you're including candidates. Just for those who haven't heard me say it every single meeting, our Nevada State ERA is equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by this state or any of its political subdivisions. And here's the very important part that so important in our state. It's on account of race, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, disability, ancestry, or national origin. And that is so comprehensive and so inclusive. And I believe New York is working on something sort of similar, but we're, the first state to be working on this, and it's going to take everything to educate people and get this passed. Carolyn Maloney on Equal Pay Day, she had a really great quote. One of the most basic protections women are lacking in our country is constitutional equality. She said, I've advocated for the Equal Rights Amendment for over 25 years. The ERA would establish freedom from discrimination on the basis of sex as a constitutional right. This is the federal ERA. There's no other way to enforce equal pay for equal work in the courts unless we get the ERA. And it is one of the many permanent fundamental fixes we need to stem the tide of gender inequality in our country. So when we talk about Equal Pay Day and pay equity, we know that women of color have the larger wage gap and the wealth gap, where is much more for women of color. And we've invited some really great people today to talk about that. I was listening to a program the other day talking about the wealth gap and how that, that's the money to retire on, that's to own your own home. Your safety net for medical emergencies. And when women are paid less, they don't have that. And it's just so important. So we've invited these amazing activists to talk about what is needed to achieve pay equity for all, as we work towards that with our ERA, with some of the laws that need to be passed. So Cecia Alvarado is a dear friend, and we'll start off our panel discussion. She's with Somos Votantes. She's going to tell us a little bit about that. It's a new Latina-led progressive organization mobilizing the Latino community. And thank you, Cecia, for taking time to join us.
Thank you, my dear friend, Jerry. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cecia Alvarado. I am the Executive Director for Somos Votantes. We are a Latino-led and Latina-funded organization that aims at engaging and empowering Latino voters to bring prosperity and hope into our communities. Our organization is led by 98% Latinas that have been doing this work, from labor to national campaigns to advocates from our state. We were funded in 2019 and have run large programs at a national level, supporting the work that many of the Latino organizations are already doing in the ground. So we are the first state to expand to the ground, and we are in the process of building a long-term infrastructure to support Latino voters in the state of Nevada. Thank you so much for having me here today. Always happy to be here with my allies and friends, and eager to start on this conversation.
Thanks, Cecia. So before we go to the next one, talk to us a little bit about what Latinas have been going through in the pandemic, what you're seeing on equal pay, on pay equity in your community.
Yes, thank you so much, Jerry. I mean, we know that when it comes to disparities in pay, the Latinas are all the way in the bottom. In 2015, the study showed that we were again, like the one group that is in the bottom of the pay disparity. And this has widened with the pandemic. The pandemic has created a wider and a bigger wealth gap between Latinas and pretty much any other group. So it's very important to bring awareness around this issue. And this is why, as myself, as a Latina, as an immigrant, I'm very passionate to have these discussions and always talk about the era, because this is the first step towards achieving that equity in our communities for our Latinas and Hispanic women.
Thank you. And I know you encourage Latina women to run for office, and how important it is to get women in all these, from school board to governor someday. So, thank you. And Erica Washington, I was just making sure I see you on the screen, Erica.
I'm here.
Oh, good. I was trying. There you are. The fun of Zoom, looking at the boxes. So Erica, I was so happy that you're here. She's the executive director of Make It Work Nevada, an organization that we really love working with. They center their work in organizing around the experiences and challenges of Black women and women of color. And they're known for their kitchen table conversations that we've attended. And thank you so much, Erica, for joining us. And can you talk to us a little bit about what Black women have been going through and what that would look like if they had pay equity?
Sure. Well, I think well, first, thank you for having me. Happy Sunday, everyone. I think what it would look like if Black women have pay equity, then most other people would have pay equity. The thing about pay equity, Make It Work Nevada has been organizing with and around Black women issues for many years. And they're not necessarily issues that are special to Black women. It just seems to be that sometimes we are more in the margins than others. And so when we think about equal pay, when we first started talking about it with folks, a lot of folks honestly just don't think that it's real. So, you'll have folks who'll say, that's never happened. I don't know anybody that's ever happened to, but how many people actually talk about how much they bring home on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, or what have you? Those are one of the, it's like politics and religion, things you just don't talk about in mixed company. And no one is expecting that someone else is making more than them, or expecting that someone else got a raise and they didn't. And so you don't have these discussions. And I think that was one of the first things we realized, is that people just need to have the discussion. It's nothing to be embarrassed about how much you make. If you're not making enough money to make ends meet, then it doesn't matter how much you're making, because you're not making enough. And the other thing is, we spent a lot of time in the very beginning of our campaigns around paid leave, comparing ourselves to white men, which I think, we shouldn't do that at all anyway. But comparing ourselves to the white man's paycheck is not going to help us find equity. What we need to do as women is compare our paychecks to each other and figure out how we can have a true and real sisterhood and what that looks like, because white women are always ahead, and then it layers in on down. When I looked up the dates for this year, March 15th was Equal Pay Day, which really encompasses white women. But then last year, we celebrated Black Women Equal Pay Day. It was on August 3rd. This year it will be on September 21st. So it's taken even longer. So we're moving in the wrong direction. Native women are at November 30th, and Latina women are at December 8th. They're basically into next year. So the problem is that we aren't spending enough time focusing on our women as a whole and just saying, how do I turn around and lift up the woman behind me? How do I turn around and lift up Native and Latina women so they can at least get to September where I am? And then how do we have then moving up to March? And then how do we then get to a point where we're like, okay, now we need to make equity with men? But I think we have to start, at a macro level and really think about what that looks like to support each other and to ask the questions and to stand where you can and say, I realize there's something nefarious going on and we need to do something about it. And I think the other main reason that you'll see so much pay disparity is that, women are the caretakers. So whether you're head of household or you're married, who's the one that's going to end up having to take the time off to care for a sick parent or a child or what have you, or, have any sort of maternity leave, and that takes you off some sort of track. But we also, women are the main folks in a lot of care positions. So whether you're a teacher, or a daycare provider, or a home health care worker, those are usually women, and they are usually underpaid almost 100% of the time. We talk about teachers all the time being underpaid, and there's a t-shirt, I think someone on Instagram was wearing, that says teachers are underpaid because women's work isn't valued. So whether you're a man or a woman, teachers' work is just not valued and is looked at as a woman's job. And as long as we consider things less than or are not equal to, because if you are in electronics, technology field, what have you, that's looked at as a man's job for whatever reason. There are a lot of brilliant, women in the sciences. However, when it comes to other positions that have been dominated by women, they've stayed at the bottom of the scale. They haven't rose with the cost of living at all. And so we need to look at that as well. How do we value the work that's being done that actually keeps the economy running? Daycares keep the economy running. Hospitals keep the economy running. Schools keep the economy running. Without those things, as we saw during the pandemic, nothing could get done. Schools shut down, daycare shut down. Very little work was happening in there. Why? Because, someone had to take care of the kids.
Exactly. And one of the programs I was listening to, I did post it on the Nevada Now Facebook page. National Now had a program on pay equity, and they were talking about workplace segregation. And just what you were talking about, Erica, I made some notes about it. Women are concentrated in the lower paid positions, even within companies that management is men and women in the lower paid positions. And then the lack of transparency around pay, that people don't know what the other people are even make, and opportunity for promotions are sometimes on the golf, they're playing golf and they're talking about promotions, and the women don't even, get the opportunity or the knowledge about it.
Yeah, we've talked before about being in the room where it happens, and knowing that people promote people who look like them, and who remind them of themselves in some sort of way. So if it's a well-to-do white man, that's what he's going to look for. They're not looking outside the box, and you'll hear it over and over again. Oh, we just haven't found anyone qualified to do that job. I don't know where they look at or what they're looking for, but it's an excuse to use to say that there aren't any women, or there aren't any Black women, or any Asian women, whatever that looks like. There just aren't any there aren't enough women in high enough positions. And when there are, then we're also then looked at as, if we promote another woman, that you're playing favoritism, even though it doesn't necessarily look like that when it's just a bunch of white men in the room and they hire another one. No one's thinking about favoritism or what have you, or you're playing some sort of race card or gender card or what have you, as opposed to finding someone who reminds you of you, that you want to help bring up into the next level. And we have to stop feeling guilty about promoting women when we are women who are in power. We need to not feel guilty about it at all, about looking first to help promote another woman.
Thank you. That's so important. So we'll keep the conversation going. We will have some time for questions, and we're going to move on to Grace Vergara Mctal, another wonderful friend to Nevada Now. She's the executive director of SEIU Nevada, and Michelle Maese on our board is also at SEIU, so we're big fans. They represent healthcare and public service employees across the state, unions, frontline workers, and we want to welcome Grace and hear a little bit about what you think, not just with AAPI women, but also union women.
Thank you, Jerry, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm just what I wanted to see if I could just give us there's a small data about the AAPI groups, but I wanted to give a little bit of what we have, So then I could just kind of maybe start a conversation. In the US, AAPI women working full-time year-round are typically paid on average just 85 cents for every dollar paid to white men, which leads to a loss of 833 every month, 10,000 every year, and 400,000 over the span of 40 years career. The AAPI refers to people who are part of the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander population, which includes more than 50 ethnic groups. With that estimated, it has an estimated 12.7 million API women living in here in the United States in 2019. So when we're looking at this diverse group of women in the workforce, I think it is important to know that women are represented in both low wages and high wage fields. In fact, 27% of employed AAPI workers, about 75% works in healthcare or the food service field. But I think it's also important that if we don't acknowledge the disparities within those 50 subgroups, the policy makers normally would ignore the issues that disappropriate harm our low incomes and marginalized Asian women, including the housing, employment, healthcare, education, voting, the other stuff. So, but I think one of the things I wanted to talk about is the disparity on wages with AAPI, women, especially in women, is because I think the stereotype that everybody in this room have heard is the model minority, right? A lot of people think about if you're AAPI, you should be, you're characterized as high level, you excels in everything, you're overachievers, and you have a high level of success compared to general public. But we're not thinking about the groups that really that is a myth. There's no such thing as modern minority. Even in Asians, like Asian people supposed to be good in mathematics, you excel in everything. So people don't think about us. They don't think about API women that are also suffering in wages disparity and in inequality. So women are paid 85, think about it, 85 cents for every dollar of a white man. And I get what Erica was talking about. We should compare ourselves to women. But if you think about it, white women, like she said, still makes money, it makes more money than API women. So this whole model minority, I think it's unfair, and I think it's a myth. It's not true. There are struggling API women because of that thinking, and it also gives us this notion of they don't need all these jobs. And yes, women works in a front line. API works in frontline in healthcare, but there are other people that don't work in healthcare. I think we need to think about that. And if we think about as an immigrant coming here, I was an adult when I came here, and I tell my story about making $3.50 when I got here 30 something years ago, mopping floors on my knees. And I thought about, is this really the American dream that everybody in the Philippines talks about, right? Me mopping floor, I was a medical technologist in the Philippines. I came here and I was mopping floor for $3.50. And I thought to myself, this cannot be the American dream. So as a good immigrant, you strive yourself, you work, and I work for Kaiser Permanente. And I realized then that when you have a union, there is equality. Because at Kaiser Permanente, we have a union. There was over 50 years of union. And that's when I experienced the respect, that I have dignity, that I don't need to mop floors for $3.50 because we have a union. And I was an activist when I was young, 14 years old when I was in the Philippines. So I got here. I said, oh, so this is how you get the American dream. You put people in the union, and that's why I became an organizer. And that was my goal in life, is to put as many people as possible in the union. So everybody can feel the equality, they have a voice at work, and they have the respect and the dignity for every single cent that we are getting paid. There is dignity to it when you have a union. And I know there's a lot of other beliefs there, but for me, my experience, union is the way to have equality for everybody to have, because in your contract, it spells out how much everybody is making. You don't need to, it's not a secret. If you're a woman, if you're a man, it doesn't matter what color of your skin, where you're from, if you're doing the same jobs, you're getting paid equally. And that's why I really believe, in my opinion, that there should be unions for everyone. We believe in our union. We're raising our stake. We're organizing 13,000 home care workers here in Nevada, which are predominantly women and women of color, because we've seen a lot of injustices and unfairness on that industry. The home care workers always been invisible, and them organizing the union is the way that they can get the respect and the equality that they deserve. So thank you for having me.
So when I hear that about the unions, I always tell people that that's a way for equality. They can't discriminate because you're a woman and you have the job, and that's what the job pays, and that's what we're hoping to get for everyone. I know. Zoe, tell me real quickly. I was going to try to Google it, but easier to talk to Zoe about the ERA. Alice Paul said that she didn't know when she was asked what would the ERA do. What was her statement about? You know.
I do know, and it's my favorite response. What will the ERA do? And Alice, the author, said, well, we shall see. In other words, she understood that this is a pillar and it's going to hold up the possibility, but it is going to breathe with the comings and goings of Congress, the comings and goings of the Supreme Court. It's going to breathe with society, as we're watching now with all these other things. But at least, at the minimum, there will be a gigantic pillar that makes inequality under the law unconstitutional. And when you twist that sentence around backwards and you realize it's saying inequality under the law will be unconstitutional. And but I thought it was great that Alice didn't make stuff up, and she just said, well, we shall see. I thought that was great.
Thank you. So that's what I'm thinking. We shall see what the state ERA can do. That'll depend on the legislature. And there's people around the country that are looking at their states to find out what laws it will affect. But hopefully it will look like having a union and having equality once we have that in our Constitution. So Amy Koo, we hadn't met until, I don't know if we've seen each other at any events, but we're so grateful that you're here. She's the political director of One APIA Nevada. They advance the interests of Asian American Islander Nevadans through advocacy on issues such as healthcare and education and pathway to citizenship. Thanks, Amy. I know we talked about some of the things your group is working on, and also the hate crimes that you've seen, and the equality for people in your community. And so we're grateful to have you here.
Thank you so much, Sherry, and thank you everyone for having me on. Grace already went over a lot of the statistics that we have for the API community, so thank you so much, Grace, for bringing that. I just want to add a couple of more things to the conversation and to highlight a couple of things. In the API community, like Grace said, there's so many different ethnic groups, there's so many different diverse groups that are living in the U.S. And I think that when we look at pay disparity, it's not a good way to look at it, to look at the API community as a whole, because there's so much disparity in between different ethnic groups. So for example, we know that groups that came here because they were refugees because of war that we as a country decided to have on their borders, those are all things that we have to consider when we're talking about the API community. And I think especially with this narrative of like a good immigrant or a bad immigrant, that's kind of why we don't really look at those disparities, because when we look at the differences between the ethnic groups, it can be very uncomfortable to, see that there are certain ethnic groups. I am Chinese, and my parents were only able to immigrate here because they have higher degrees. They have, education that made it easier for them to get a visa here. That's something that's not comfortable to talk about, especially when you're comparing to people, or when you're listening to other stories of people who have different experiences from you, who have a very different view of immigration to the US. And having this good immigrant or bad immigrant narrative is really not productive to, really seeing the stories and the issues that people are facing, because this is generational trauma. This is people who are running from war, who are running from poverty back home. And that's something that we carry even in work today. So I know that a lot of people who enter the workforce in the US, they're not just making money for the people who are currently living in the US in their homes. They're also making money to send back to their families, back to the Philippines, back to China, back to places where people, are still waiting to immigrate here, or still, have family who aren't able to immigrate to the US. And so I think that's something that's really important when we're talking about the API community, to really focus on the differences in between the ethnic groups, and not to just see, the most successful Asian Americans and to say that's what every Asian American experience is going to be like in the US. When in reality, there's generational privileges that people bring from overseas here that we really just don't talk about. And I really want to open that conversation, because in order to have a serious conversation about how we can uplift all API women, we need to talk about those differences and how they actually impact life here, how they actually impact the prosperity that we can have here. Because there is this idea of an American dream that everyone is sold, but not everyone has access to that. I think especially when looking at the pandemic, we're seeing that in full force. So we know that a lot of APIs are on the front line working in healthcare, specifically a lot of nurses. And this is something that we have to think about, in the fact that the US has recruited talent from other countries, especially nurses, especially teachers, things that aren't paid the best. And they promise them, you're going to come here, going to have a good job, have good benefits, when in reality, they're pressured to take longer hours, they're pressured to take more shifts, they're pressured to work past retirement age, because oftentimes a lot of immigrants start later in their careers here. And just to give you a statistic on that, Filipinos make up 4% of registered nurses in the US, but according to a March 2021 study by National Nurses United, 26.4% of nurses who died from COVID-19 and related complications in the US were Filipino. So just a disparity in the amount of work that people are doing on the front lines, and especially the work that is not seen as well. People who are janitors, people who are taking care of these, hospitals during this surge. I think those are all things that we need to really talk about when we talk about pay equity, because it's not just about, the pay that people get in their work, but also, like Grace was mentioning, how you feel during work, the quality of your work-life balance. Those things are really important as well. And especially for us, we really want to focus on the minimum wage. We know that that's going to be a big part of how we help the most vulnerable people. By raising the minimum wage to $15, that means that we would be raising the wage for 36% of retail workers, 35% of residential or nursing home workers, 64% of food preparation workers. And those are the people who really need help right away, who need immediate help. Because while we're working on pay equity for the whole community, while we're working on these things and these issues that we need to really have long and hard conversations about, there are people who aren't making enough to pay their bills, aren't making enough to survive. And that's something that we really need to focus on, I think. And thank you so much for having me again.
Well, thank you for joining us and talking about that minimum wage. It's on the ballot, but I believe it's just to bring up some of the disparities that it had when it passed before. So that's going to be an important ballot question too, though, here in Nevada. So we also wanted to have the Indigenous voice as well. And Mercedes had suggested that I talk to Teresa Melendez. She's the director of tribal outreach for the Nevada Democratic Victory. And they work for equality for the Indigenous community. And I talked to Teresa, and I'm so happy that she could join us and talk to us about that community. Thanks, Teresa.
Hi, Jerry, and it's a pleasure to be invited to participate in this conversation today. As Jerry mentioned, the Director of Tribal Outreach with Nevada Democratic Victory. We're the coordinated campaign here in the state. But after November 15th, I will be back working on the C3 side, working with Native communities as an Indigenous community organizer. And my background is in Indigenous language and culture revitalization, and a lot of my passion work is around Indian education. So as I was, listening to the conversations, I was thinking how different our my community's conversations are in this area, because tribes are sovereign nations. So we're not racial groups. We are sovereign political groups in the United States. And so we definitely are communities of color who are affected by the larger issues of, communities of color and women of color in the United States. And so as I was, I've had the pleasure of listening to Erica speak a couple of times. I'm always just like really inspired by the things that she says. And so I don't think I have anything new to add to what was already said about the struggles of women of color in this state and in this country and what it means to have pay equity. What I would say is the work that you all are doing, the work that we see to uplift issues for women and issues for women of color, I feel like the Indigenous population, we benefit from the work that you all are moving forward. A lot of, because state law doesn't affect tribal law. So the labor practices, the HR practices by tribal governments would not be affected by Nevada ERA. And so there are different ways, I think there's different ways to have that conversation with tribes. As tribes are becoming more sophisticated with state and national politics and moving to a place where we're leaning into our power and opportunities to create more visibility. We're becoming more involved with politics. So I think there's conversations around like tribal endorsements where tribes can endorse or support this type of legislation. I think that's something to look into. And I was thinking about the different work that we need to do within the tribal governments to support better pay. But a lot of the work that we're focused on within the tribal government spaces, there are 27 federally recognized tribes and colonies in the state of Nevada, is one of the largest populated tribal states in the country. And we're very much at a space where we're fighting for visibility. And like the US labor markets just started tracking Native statistics like 2 months ago. So we weren't even recorded in that data up until recently. And I believe the Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, pushed for that recognition or inclusion. But so much of I just finished meeting with several tribal councils up north, and a lot of the conversations that we're having are very much about protecting tribal lands and resources and water rights, and trying to limit the encroachment of urban sprawl and the expansion of the military bases, and fighting for equal adequate funding for our reservation-based schools and for our students. And so I'm appreciative of this work, and I think that what the conversation would be for the tribes in the state would then be conversations about how does this state co-govern with the 27 federally recognized tribes and colonies? Sometimes we see in legislation like this, there'll be a clause saying that, and there will be collaboration or consultation. Usually it's consultation with the tribes. And so we really need to move to a space of co-governance and collaboration and from consultation. And so I think being a part of these conversations is helpful to understand that Nevada has a densely populated Native population, and that this is stolen Indigenous and stolen occupied Indigenous land. So I did appreciate the land acknowledgement. I think it's really beautiful as organizations are starting to pick up land acknowledgements, and for all of us to really think about the indigenous people of the state are actively fighting to preserve and expand their ancestral homelands and working to conserve their water rights so that they can continue to exist in their traditional homelands. And they're really in a survival state as they're working to make sure that their governments have the funding that they need to operate and the staffing that they need to function. That's when there's usually a lot of Native women on tribal governments. There's usually not a lot of Native women that work in those tribal spaces. And so we often see Native women staying in tribal communities where there's a lot of support, whereas tribal Head Start programs, tribal daycare programs, a lot of times it's free. The school programs usually have a lot of before school, after school programming, but the pay level is so low on reservations. So that's one thing. We have a hard time recruiting high skilled, because we can't pay for high wages. A lot of tribes, some of the tribes in Nevada are fully dependent on the federal government for federal funding. And so it's hard to recruit people if you're only able to pay low wages. And if you're recruiting them to live in rural areas of the state where housing and food and basic necessities are difficult to come by. So what we see when in tribal communities and reservation communities is that there's often, a lot of times folks will take positions in tribal communities. They're temporary. They know that they'll be folks don't plan to stay there long. They come to tribal communities to get their foot in the door in the occupation, to build work experience and resume, to get the trainings that the tribe can provide through their federal grants. Once they've had a little bit of experience, they start shopping elsewhere and then they move out of our community. So we have a lot of turnover in our community because of that. So in general, our bigger issue would be we really need to be able to uplift tribal economies. And so that requires the state and the local governments working with tribal nations to help move land into trust, working with the county commissions, not holding up tribal economic development. So in general, we can bring qualified, skilled employees into the tribal government spaces, and we can pay them living and comfortable wages so that we can retain employees, males and females of every race.
Well, thank you. So that does sound like pay equity sort of has something to do with that. And we have a lot to learn about that. And it's not something that we hear about often. So thank you for talking about that. And again, I think we have a lot to learn about that in Nevada. There's a lot of indigenous people living here within all over our state. So you and I talked about in the rurals as well. So there's a lot there. So Erica, I want to get back to you and maybe have the conversation. One of the things on our state ERA, it isn't just about gender, it is about race. It is about national origin and ancestry. There's no discrimination. And do you see that helping? And I know, like we're talking about, we don't know what that looks like for laws. A lot of people are looking at current laws to see how it'll strengthen or change our state laws. What are your thoughts on having that in our state ERA?
I didn't know much about the ERA before we passed it here, honestly, because it's been around for so long. And honestly, I thought it was sort of done. Back in the 70s, and it wasn't. And so, having to make sure it's ratified in all these states in order to have some sort of equality, I think it shows the values of our country a little bit if it's taking this long just to solidify that we should be equal, both in gender and in race and in creed and what have you. And so I'll be completely honest, I don't know what it will do. Because without penalties, people will still do bad things, right? So when we talked about the ERA before when it passed, what year was that? 2017, I think it was. Was it 17?
So Nevada ratified in 2017, but it still hasn't been published on the federal level. So
right, and so. When we were talking about it in 2017, I asked, what does this mean? And what would this mean? And even when it's ratified at the federal level, what exactly does that mean? Because we can say that things are equal under the law, but how the law is interpreted is always by an opinion, which is why judge rulings are called opinions. And so there's still wiggle room for people to do for people not to be held accountable for their wrongdoing. And with equal pay specifically, when we talked about it at the legislature and when it was, taken to NERC, which is the Equal Rights Commission here, for people to be able to report any wrongdoings. They only get a certain amount of time to do it, number one. Number two, it has to be proven that it was done purposely. And so that's where the problem lies, is because no one is just going to say, oh, I purposely didn't give Cecia as much money as I gave Maya. I'm just throwing people's names out here on the screen. No one's going to say that. Right. It was an accident. It was a clerical error. It was, our accounting error. It was something. And so unless there are real penalties involved, and this is one of the things that I really loved about Senator Spearman. And she's like, there needs to be penalties. You have to be held accountable for these things, because that's the only thing that talks when it comes to business owners of these large entities where a lot of times these things happen. You have to be scared of their bottom. They have to be scared that their bottom line is going to be affected. If not, then it's just, a pat on the back or pat on the hand or what have you. So, I am hopeful. I want the ERA to be ratified federally. I want that to happen. But what also needs to happen is we have to make sure that structurally how businesses are put together when they're getting these different abatements in the state and tax credits or what have you to come and spend time in the state. What are we also requiring of them when it comes to hiring? How are we making sure that they're hiring Nevadans? And then how are we making sure they're hiring women? They're hiring Black women, Latino women, they're hiring Latina men, all of these different things, or Latino men, sorry, that there has to be some quotas. And I know people are afraid of, affirmative action, but that's because it's been taken in misconstrued. And really what it's about is making people dig deeper and try harder and not just picking whatever they see right in front of them. It's not about picking somebody because they are Black or because they are a woman, but it is going to look for qualified individuals who happen to be, these other things, whatever that other thing is. And I don't use the term minority because I just don't like it. And we're not really minorities when it comes down to it. And it feels like a term that's meant to be, to make you feel like less than. And so because I am not less than, and none of the women on this panel or in this room are less than, I don't use the word minority, and women are actually the majority, have always been more women in the world than men, yet we're still considered somehow or another a minority, which to me just means that a man made that up and we've just been going along with their line of thought. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, Jerry, but yeah, I would like the ERA to have, be firmly passed everywhere and ratified and all of that, but it won't mean anything unless we hold folks accountable, and that we again do it together as women, because if we can collectively come together as women, there are more of us than them, and we need to start using that power for good.
Thank you. So Senator Spearman was supposed to try to get on. She is at a fundraiser right now. And so my other mentor is Zoe Nicholson. For those of you who don't know, and we talk about her all the time in our programs even when she's not here, she's my best friend, but also my mentor. And she fasted for the ERA in the 70s, or the 80s, I'm sorry. Sorry, Zoe. And has been working on the federal ERA for a very long time. We just got back from Austin for a movie premiere of the movie Still Working 9 to 5. It's a documentary about the movie back in the 80s, 9 to 5, with Dolly Parton, Jane Fonda, Lily Tomlin, and Zoe was interviewed for the documentary. And also we had Lily Ledbetter with us, who is just a wonderful pay equity activist. If you don't know who she is, you should look her up. You should know who she is, but we keep talking to young people who don't know who Lily is. So it's like, you need to know. So Zoe, the state ERA, you and I talk about the federal ERA all the time, and our state ERA is so much more inclusive. What are your thoughts on that? I know Alice Paul said she didn't know what difference would it make, but because ours covers so many areas, where do you think that's going to be helpful?
I never followed directions. It's part of my charm.
Yes,
I want to go back to something Erica said, if I may,
of course.
because look at all these people who are here. What's the number now? There are 484 people on the call.
Or 42.
I was kidding. I want every single woman here to let her red flags fly as soon as you hear the word term limit. And when you hear term limit, it is what I call the patriarchy, making sure that women are not starting at the same starting line. Now, term limit has affected our ability to charge men with sexual assault. Term limit has affected our ability to have rape kits tested. Alice Paul, when she found out there was a term limit on the ERA in 1972, she said to the women, it will never pass. And now, Erica, you mentioned term limit. I want you to always, your ears just start burning when you hear term limit, and ask yourself if this applies in the men's world. Do they have a term limit? And no, they don't. So term limit is a way to disable us across the board based on gender. And I can't resist the possibility of saying that to you. Okay, so the ERA, I think what you're really asking me is, the ERA is only federal law. It's not state law. And state law, it will help the people who live in the state, even, while we diddle around trying to get the federal one done. But you can see it's the way it breathes is California, for example, is working now on having actually a welcome program for women seeking abortions, as we're watching Roe diminish. But California law is expanding and not letting that diminishment not only not stop California women, but also assisting financially and housing in every way women who need to, come out of state and maybe come to California. And I know that makes it impossible for the poor, believe me. But I'm just saying that state law actually can have a breadth and a depth in interpretation. And I'm a big fan of the Nevada ERA. Certainly the federal ERA is lacking in all of that breadth, but that's what we will see in the courts. And, that's why we elect judges. And it's hard to imagine, but when you get that ballot, those judges, years ago, I just looked to see if there were women, because I thought it was too hard to look at all those judges. But now I'm thinking, wait a minute, those judges control the interpretation of our laws. So it's really important to look at the judges you're voting on when you get those ballots, and how the ERA, both state and federal, will be interpreted, will be in the courts. Now, forgive me, I'm always long-winded, but I want to say something that I feel is really important. A lot of us are talking today about inequality in pay. And when the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act passed, and it said it's illegal for people, Goodyear, for example, to pay men and women differently for the same job. What they didn't do was pass the Fair Paycheck Act, which is what you're really asking about. When somebody here said, well, we never talk about what we get paid. Well, the Fair Paycheck Act, which was a sister to the Fair Pay Act, would have required corporations, companies to make public what people are paid. And here comes that time limit thing again. When Lilly went to court, she went to the Supreme Court, and Goodyear was not required to make public that she was paid $200,000 less than Bob working at the next desk, because we didn't have paycheck transparency and the time ran out. And again, it was a time limit on taking that grievance to court, that when Lilly got to the Supreme Court, the loss hinged on the fact that it had gone past the time limit. So that time limit is a sword that cuts us off at the knees every time we turn around. So please know, and you should ask yourself, we wanted the ERA to be the 27th Amendment. And you ask yourself, well, how long did the 27th Amendment actually take? It took 203 years because it was written by men for men, and there was no time limit. Thanks for your time.
Thank you from my teacher. So one of the things we didn't talk about that I just want to mention, and then we'll get into some questions if we have some, is that when you have, so I had a situation at my work. I was paid 25% less than my coworker. Exact same job, both of us in sales, and we're sitting for dinner one night and he tells me how much he's making, and it's 25% more than me. And it took me 2 years to get that money. And it was, and I was the good, going in and telling him about my sales numbers. And I would, I kept trying to prove I deserved to have that money. And when they saw me at a equal pay rally as a Nevada Now president back when it was in my 40s, I was then as well. Then they called their lawyers and said, we better get her to equal pay. And what I didn't realize then, and Zoe and Lily and Senator Sherman have talked to me about, is I lost retirement money. I lost, vacation pay money. I was so happy to get that money that I didn't even think about how it's affected now that I'm on Social Security, and how much less women make on Social Security because of that. And they don't have the money to save for retirement because we're just getting by. And then also it's an issue about men as well, because if there's two people in the household and one person's making 25% less, that's affecting their entire family. So I think we don't think about it as the whole picture of how this affects people and children and, the cost. And I know one of the things we've worked on, and I think Claire or maybe Michelle Gorlow could tell me, we worked on a bill to have where they can't require you to tell what or we're working on it, I think, to tell your pay so that they could, you say I made 40,000 last job and the guy comes in, he says he made 50. And so you're paid according to what your previous job was. And I know we were working on that. Claire, is that something someone's working on a bill, or is that passed?
It has not passed, but it's something that is in the forefront for the simple reason people are retaliated on if they discuss that. And that's the part that we want to take out.
And then that follows women through their lives. If you're always having to tell what you made in the last job, you're paid accordingly. Cecia, you had your hand up. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I was trying to look for raise the hand. I couldn't find it. So, the option one. Just a few things I wanted to add, Jerry, if I may. And so the bill was actually, and I can't recall the bill number right now, but it was sponsored by Assemblywoman B. Duran, which is what it does is that, and part of it passed. So as usual, first step towards, so much more work that we need to do as a state. So basically when we apply for jobs, as part of our negotiation is, how much are you looking to make, right? Because they're trying to lowball us in the pay. And so with this law, they can no longer do that. So if I go and apply for a position, then the employer should, what they have to do now with, the law says now is that they have to present me with those options. They have to say, this is the salary range or the pay for this position. And then that would help me start my negotiations for the salary. So it went into effect July 1st. It has been added to our government agencies. And, I think one of the opportunities that we lacked, and I want to go back to because when you're the first person presenting, sometimes do I say everything at once or do I just break it down to pieces? Let me go back to the beginning a little bit, right? And so, and I think one of the pieces is education and implementation when it comes to legislation. So this applies to the ERA in our state. And I've said this before, and I'm going to continue to say it, right? But because as Latinos, we also face that language disparity that sometimes make us feel like we're not part of these conversations because sometimes these conversations are not happening in our native language. They're so complex. And then when, as a Latina, so many things come into place when we're talking about this wage disparity. There's a study that says that a Latina would achieve equal pay in 2197. So we are over 100 years away from Latina to achieve equal pay. With my daughter, with my next generation won't see it. And if she makes the choice to, expand and have kids, her kids won't see it, and so on and so forth. And so that is the disparity. When we talked about unemployment, Latinas have the highest unemployment rate. We can't afford childcare. We can't afford housing. And in addition to that, we are in the bottom of the disparity. And so I think a lot of things, Grace touched on something, and I think I appreciated Grace because you really gave us those, start point for so many of us that we see ourselves in you, right? As an immigrant woman, I have a very similar story. When I moved here, I was 16 years old. I used to work as a babysitter in Costa Rica, and I used to that's working like every single day in the afternoon, like about 5 hours, taking care of 2 kids. I was making $20 an hour. And I'm sorry, no way, $20 a week. That's what I used to get paid, $20 a week. You would never make $20 an hour in Costa Rica as a babysitter. And when I moved to the US, I got a job helping clean up restaurants, and I used to get paid $20 a night. And that was working from like 9 all the way into 2 a.m. Because I was also a high school student. And for like the first few months, I used to get paid $20 a night for cleaning restaurants, like kitchen restaurants, and like helping clean some bars. And I was underage, so I don't know how any of that was able like happen. So so the other thing is that information, right? Like we come from countries where, $20 a week, it's a salary for somebody. To coming in here and thinking that making $20 a night for cleaning restaurants, it's a huge upgrade. It's I'm able to make this money now. If I work 5 nights a week, I'm making $100 a week. What I used to make in like almost 2 months worth of my work as a babysitter. So that also plays into this disparity gap. It's that lack of like information, the lack of understanding of like how like our own laws work. And also that cultural component that comes with Latinos, and said, you're a hard worker. You be grateful for those opportunities. We don't talk about wanting to earn more money. Be grateful you have a job. You stay quiet because if you start asking about more money, or if you start asking about why some people get more paid than you, then you may lose your job. So this is better than nothing. And that mentality has been with us and within our culture for generations after generations. I mean, I just heard this conversation from someone whose husband was trying to negotiate a salary, and the parents who were immigrants were advising him not to even talk about it. You already make enough, you have a house, you can afford it. You're you're risking to lose your job. And I think it's because we're usually not part of conversations where we are empowered to say, this is not, what I'm supposed to get paid. And just to close it too, I would say, Jerry, is also the part that in not just in our families, right? And this conversation's not happening. But also the fact that we are so accustomed to, even when we are in positions of power, to say, you're not allowed to discuss your salary with your employees. And a lot of companies is still that, like they have that policy where you cannot disclose how much you make, and otherwise you can lose your job. Like it is part of your like reading rules of your organizations. And so I think I see now why where, many companies have that you are not allowed to speak to each other about how much you make.
Absolutely. And that's how our company was. And even as a white woman, with obviously more privilege, I realized I was unable to talk about it. And people would say, why didn't you, take them to court? And why didn't you, but I was a single mom with, trying to keep my job. And so it's a difficult situation, and we're hoping that some of these things would strengthen the laws to make equality for everyone. And one of them is gender identity, and that's a whole nother program. We have a lot of areas that we hope it'll help equality for all. So I think Teresa has her hand up, and then Eva, if you could help me look and see if there's any questions we need to answer, or if people want to put their hands up with questions. Teresa, did you have something you were going to say?
Yeah, I just had a thought.
Sure.
I've been enjoying all the panelists and the conversation. And I was just thinking about, even the next steps from, once we're able to ensure that there's less opportunities for racial or discrimination based on status or gender or all these other things, then it's next creating environments of belonging in these organizations. And so I think that that's something that I've been thinking about and talking about more, and even looking at ways that we institutionalize those transition of the culture of an organization or the culture of a business. And so not only are you able to gain access into that institution, organization, or business, and that you are being paid at equal rate, but then moving it beyond in the conversation that goes, creating an organization and an environment of belonging where your cultural norms are incorporated, and that those are things that you can talk about, and that recognizing that we function in a very white European culture and in most organizations in our state government and even in our nonprofit organizational structures, and as women of color and people of color that are, I sometimes don't even like using that, but folks of different cultures, that when we're able to know that our ways of understanding the world are valued and respected and just as beautiful as those from other communities, we can create a safer, stronger, I don't just want to say more inclusive, but it's like we can serve the people better. We can serve our clients better. We can serve our constituents better when we're speaking to all of them. So, working as a community organizer and working in politics, and people keep telling us they represent us, but they don't often. They intend to. Intentions are good, but even from the staffing structure, the organization, if everything is still set up, you have some policies and talking points that support other people, but if the culture of the organization is still European, Western, white American, then it's like you fully haven't invested in this understanding of inclusion and belonging. So it's great. Let's create some policies. Great. Let's start hiring people of color, but then also let's start incorporating other cultures and changing the culture of the organization. You got
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
For bringing up the thing about the minority thing, when you brought up that, the word minority is almost kind of, a bad thing in a sense, or it makes people of minorities feel less than, I never really knew that myself. I grew up thinking that, minorities were traditionally a word or label used to kind of describe the different disparities, people have been through. But I wanted to ask, kind of going in that, do you feel like in that regard that people, maybe there's a better word to use, or maybe people shouldn't use the word minorities?
Erica, I think that's for you.
I prefer that they didn't, because I don't know why we need to distinguish it in that way, because it does mean less than, minor or whatever. To be minor in the grand scheme of life makes you sound like you're not important, no matter how many of you there are, whatever that you is, because again, we are multifaceted people. I'm not just a woman. I'm not just Black. I'm not, I'm a lot of different things. So when you start to piece that apart, yeah, there will be differences. And there's nothing wrong with celebrating said differences. And I think that is also really important. I want people to be able to do that because Black folks are not monolithic. There are many immigrant Black folks as well. So, and something that I think Amy and Teresa brought up in thinking about how we're naming ourselves or how we've been named by the government or what have you, whatever category we've been put in, is because someone put us in that category, but it doesn't equate all of who we are. And so if we want to hire and have diversity means a lot of things. And again, it doesn't just mean hiring Black people. It could be Black immigrants as well who come from different countries, whether that's from South America or if that's coming from a country in Africa or elsewhere. We're all, the diaspora is all over the place. So same with, women and all of that. I think it's just something, I don't want to say just call everyone people because we are different, but at the same time, I think using the word minority is disparaging. And I think it could be, over time, I think a lot of the reasons why we have the infighting or the oppression, even from our own people, our own women and or own cultural folks with the same background, is because it's been ingrained in us that that's what we are and that's how we're supposed to act and that's how we have to be. And we as much as we're fighting for equity all around, and fighting to be equal to a white man's paycheck or what have you, we also have to come to realize there are many women who don't believe that pay equity is an issue or that other women do deserve less than them. And so thinking about it from that point of view, I think is really important for us to like really drill down into the structural issues that have caused folks to continue to let this happen, both men and women, because it happens across the board. But I appreciate your question, and yeah, I just think that no one should be considered a minority because we're not minor.
Thanks, Garrett. And I think the other thing is that with the ERA, it also, our state ERA also covers age, disability. We had invited to see if someone could come on to talk about, that disability is another way to discriminate. So I think that's why we feel, and I'm speaking for Senator Spearman, that our ERA needed to cover more than just gender, that, it covers all of these areas. So Eva, do you see any other questions we haven't covered?
I don't.
Okay. Well, one of the things we want to do is have as many organizations as possible supporting the state ERA with us. We're going to, we're working on some polling around it to find out what the messaging should be. I've been sworn to secrecy on how it went, but it's encouraging. I'll just say that. But we do need organizations to include it in their slates when they're talking about candidates and also ballot questions. And we want to form, even if it's an informal committee, in order to have a ballot committee that becomes a little bit more, we haven't decided what we're going to do in that area, but we want to have as many people involved as we can in all these different areas and different progressive groups. So please reach out to us. We're working with Planned Parenthood, NARAL, Battle Worn Progress is on, we're all meeting together to decide what to do next. So we need your help. And so, please reach out to us if you have any ideas on how to educate people on why this is so important. And we'll be working on other ballot questions as well. And we hope to see you on March 27th for our Meet the Candidate event, because then we can actually see each other in person. Sue, do we need to talk about anything to hype that anymore? I know I've seen some activity in the chat about the event. So.
No, I think bring judges. Judges are important, so thank you for bringing that up, Zoe. And I'll just remind people that that's a good portion of the candidates that are coming next Sunday. So again, a good time to do some one-on-one and think about what you want to find out. Right now, I want to know if Michelle Gorlow finished her laundry.
Pressing thing, Michelle.
I did get another load of towels in. Thank you.
Oh,
So happy.
I think that's awesome.
Oh, the other-
I've been watching Sarah eat. So
Oh,
Is laundry ever done?
well,
no,
that's
laundry's never done.
the beauty of Zoom programs. But I also want to mention a couple other things we'll be working on this year. There is a art for ERA that just opened up in Sacramento last night. And is it Sacramento? Oakland. So he's always going, no, not Sacramento. Oakland. And they're going to be traveling around the country. There's many different artists that have made these wonderful equality posters, and we're thinking about having one here. So if you know someone who has, it could be an art studio, it could be a coffee shop, it could be a place where they can display the art and we can have an event. We're looking at doing that here. I know Zoe's thinking about having one in Long Beach as well. And then if you were on our call with Kate Kelly the other day, we met a bunch of ERA activists. Kate Kelly just wrote a book, Ordinary Equality, and she's doing a book tour. And we were thinking we might have for the state ERA some ideas of having a book tour, have her come and talk about the ERA. And if you know, like a bookstore or some place that would be fun to have something like that. We can do some fun things around the state ERA this year to bring attention to it. So those are just some of the things we're working on. Any last words of inspiration, Zoe, before we go? We'll be talking later anyway, but go Nevada, you know.
Kind of funny you put me on the spot, but I do want to tell you something that I do now. The largest diaspora of Cambodians live in Long Beach. And there are two Khmer, that's one of their many languages, two Khmer typewriters in the whole city. So if you want to speak to or have a poster or a mural, there are two. And it's maddening. And I also want to give you a little idea that whenever you get something, ask yourself, can everybody access this? So remember we got those two home tests. I don't know how families of 6 work that out, or people without addresses. But of all the tests for COVID, not one was published in Braille. And I've never forgotten that. That really struck me hard. Like, ask yourself, who can access this wonderment? And that really wakes you up to how we disregard entire groups of people.
And ordinary equality, absolutely.
That's right.
Jerry, as I was doing some research on ERA in Nevada, I came across a quote, if I may add it to this closing remarks, and it's from our beloved Senator Pat Spearman about the passing of the era. And it reads, we have waited long enough for equal rights to be incorporated into our state constitution. We must be brave in protecting the weak, the downtrodden, the oppressed. We must be brave in lifting our fellow Nevadans to a place of justice and equality.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you for finding that. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining us.